Today, I sat down with David Johnston, the guy who in 2013 actually helped invent the playbook everyone else in AI and crypto is now reading from. David went from raising $6 million for a biodiesel startup at age 19 to launching Bid Angels after that exit. He co-authored the original DAPs thesis in 2013, and he was one of the first people to back the original ICO of Mastercoin, as well as start the first large-scale venture fund called Multicoin. Now serves as the chief open source maintainer at Morpheus AI. If you advise capital or run a family office, this conversation is the one you've been waiting for. It's the operating manual for your next 12 months. It talks about why you must own your AI instead of renting it, how to turn a $600 Mac Mini into a dedicated agent employee, how open source stacks like Morpheus and Everclaw slash closed model costs by 90%, and why owning your intelligence and the data stack underneath it will create a 100x gap between the families who get this and those who don't. We go deep on Bitcoin as a monetary reserve system for agents. We discuss intent-based agents as the final mass adoption UX layer, on-ramping to crypto. We cover the new manipulation risk of rented AI and why we're already at the 28th day of the intelligence explosion, and where the month that you onboarded in 2026 will matter as much as the year you first bought Bitcoin. If you care about protecting your network, your capital stack, and your kids from an AI world that's doubling in complexity while you sleep, then you cannot afford to miss 1 ounce of this episode. It's time to go to the atomic level.
It's time to go to the atomic level. It's time to go.
Welcome to the Atomic Level, the show where we decode the matters of wealth, one insightful conversation at a time, so that you can grow and protect your net worth and your net happiness. I'm J Snook, and today I am joined by a friend of mine I reconnected with this last week in Napa Valley, of all places, David Johnston, who is a polymath and a open source maintainer, or the chief one at Morpheus AI. We'll talk about that. But David, welcome to the show. It's great to see you again, man.
Yeah, good to see you, Chris. Glad to be here and looking forward to nerding out.
Yeah, me too. Me too. We're going to nerd out and everyone's going to take notes. And again, you know, if you are new to the space of all things Web3, AI, blockchain, or you've ignored it because it just felt like this funny money thing, but now you're listening to the show, you're listening for a reason, you're advising families around their wealth, you have a fiduciary responsibility to that, or you are a wealthy family with something to lose, and you're trying to understand what any and all of this means. I can't think of a better mind to go break down a myriad of these things with than David Johnston. And it's so funny because we're sitting literally at that table. I don't know if you noticed me or if I noticed you first. We're at this table at this event in Napa Valley that Linux and the Advanced AI Society put on. It was a curated event. I think there was maybe 125 people there. And they did these round tables about 8 hours in. And one of the topics was around OpenClaw. So I went and sat down on that one. And they went through the conversation. So the two of us started to talk, and I'm looking at the guy and I'm like, I know him. Why do I know him? But then we didn't put it together right away because we haven't seen each other in about 8 years, I think. And so then right afterwards, they're like, dude, you're David Johnston. He's like, yeah, you're J Snook. I'm like, yeah, dude, good to see you again. So it's funny. Serendipity at its best. But what are you working on? But before we get into that, let's talk about kind of your history, because it's unique. It's got a unique lens, and it's prolific in this world. But you didn't start out in this world. So talk to us a little about kind of growing up. What made you an entrepreneur, if you can think of that, and give us a little context before we get started.
Sure. There was a few entrepreneurs in my family. I kind of always looked up to my uncle and others, and decided pretty early on I didn't want to go to college and work in middle management. Sounded a lot funner to build tech companies. So I was the teenager building, websites and tech companies in my basement. And I guess it took me until about 19. I cut a deal with my parents that I was going to drop out of college after I built a multi-million-dollar company. They didn't think that was going to happen. I was pretty sure that was going to happen. So I did 1 semester, and then I finally raised about $6 million to build an energy company. And yeah, that was my ticket out of college. And I'd sort of been dabbling in internet, energy, economics, finance. And so when I saw Bitcoin in 2012, and a friend explained it to me, I was like, wait, there's a currency that can never be inflated by politicians and is controlled by math. yeah, I'd like to take my green pieces of paper and switch for that, right? And it took me a while. It wasn't easy at the time to trade all your dollars for Bitcoin. But 2012, Bitcoin was trading for $10. So that worked out pretty well. It took off from there and gave me the capital to really move on to the investment side. So I ended up starting the first angel group in the Bitcoin ecosystem to fund a lot of the early protocols.
BitAngels.
Yeah, BitAngels.
And that operates, I mean, that's global now. How many chapters of BitAngels are there right now? Do you know?
They're all over the world. Michael Turpin really took the torch with that and became the executive director. And I think they've got like 20, 30 cities all over the world. Every time I'm at a conference, there's some BitAngels event still going on. But it was sort of really formative when people were starting to deploy capital around Bitcoin in 2013. So I spoke at the first Bitcoin conference put on by the foundation. That was May of 13 in San Jose. And I spoke about building startups in Bitcoin. And so I got approached afterwards like, hey, there's no angel group in Bitcoin. You know, how do we pull one of those together? And I'm like, well, let's do it. Right. And the next day we launched. So that was sort of the origin story of BitAngels. But from there, you know, it wasn't too much longer afterwards that I wrote the paper describing this idea of decentralized applications, right? These DAPs, right? And that concept and that language was then picked up by Ethereum in their paper and as part of their platform. And so they did a great job popularizing the idea. And so I ended up building one of the first VCs to only invest in the tokens, right? Not just in the equity of the companies, but the protocols themselves. And so we got to participate and support a lot of the early efforts.
And that was Multicoin?
Multicoin came along later in 2017. And in 2013, 2014 was the DAPs fund. We actually named it after the concept. And so participated in things like the first ever ICO was Mastercoin in August of 2013. And so this is a few months after that. We'd helped support that effort through the BitAngels. It's like, wow, there are going to be a lot more projects that look like that. People sending Bitcoin and getting a reward of some new token. That seems like a great model. Vitalik would come out with the white paper for Ethereum in late 13, early 2014. And there were all these other protocols launching at the time. So we wanted to support that effort. And so ended up running that for a few years, distributing all the tokens to investors, those that held on to their tokens. I think did pretty well. But I kind of moved back onto the engineering side and helped build the second layer on Bitcoin and Ethereum, which was called the Factum protocol. Way out of its time. Like second layers didn't come around until 2021, 2022, but we built the first one all the way back in 2015 and sort of proved that there was a path for large enterprises to use the blockchain by connecting their data on chain with timestamps and showing that they could prove all of these records. And that got adopted all over the world and hosts billions of records today. But I met the Multicoin guys, Kyle and Tushar, back at South by Southwest in Vegas. At one point, they did like this experiment where they had a spin-off event in Vegas. I went over there for South by, and I had kind of orange pilled them on like Bitcoin and crypto and all that. And they were building another tech startup at the time. But they came back to me because they live in Austin as well in 2017 and say, hey, we're going to launch a fund just for crypto. Like they had finished up their startup and now they wanted to go all in crypto. And so I had the honor of being their first LP and invested in their GP. And that ended up being one of the best performing venture funds the last 7-8 years. I think that has 67x on their fund, largely thanks to their thesis around Solana and going in early there and really supporting these blockchains that were scaling the technology. So yeah, it's been a interesting evolution from, serial entrepreneur to investor to angel to VC, even took a few companies public in the early 2020s in Europe. So, yeah.
So just to unpack kind of some of that journey, I mean, obviously you came from an environment that entrepreneurship was kind of a thing, even at a young age. You kind of knew like this is an option. Some people didn't. I didn't come from a world growing up where business ownership or business development or tech, like that was nowhere even in our universe. Like it wasn't in the vernacular. So people come at things from a different perspective, and it doesn't really matter. But it's interesting when I listen to you, like a lot of 19-year-old kids have bold ideas, and I know I did and whatever, and you go, I'm going to go do this. And you're not trying to be braggadocious. You're just 19, but to execute it and to go raise $6 million. I mean, obviously you're able to impress people that know and have money and see an opportunity with your ability to execute. What skills, if anything, from the green what kind of energy company was it? I forget. And then what skills parlayed that or gave you kind of an advantage to either see kind of this early future of something that, I saw it in 2011, and I had been studying monetary theory and things like that for years. I read Creature from Jekyll Island, I think in 2001, was like 4 years old at the time. And I saw it. I just never thought they would let it live. Right. And we could talk about, that journey. I just was like, this is awesome. This is what I want all the world to run on. They're never going to let this happen. Right. Like there's no way they're going to let this work. And so, we all have like different times where we found out about it. It almost doesn't matter. It's more that you got in when you saw it and it made sense that you got in then. But did you have any advantages, do you think, to see it? Or were you just in the right place at the right time with nothing to do and nothing to lose? Like how would you frame that? I mean, you had something to lose. You had a company that you made money off of, so you had something to lose.
So my primary advantage was I was homeschooled.
Ah, interesting.
First 6 years, I got 6 years of homeschool, 6 years of public school, and it was pretty rare at the time. In the 80s, 0.2% of the U.S. population was homeschooled. Right, pre-internet, it wasn't easy, but my parents felt it was important, and my mom homeschooled us. And so, what did that give me? It gave me a pension of following my own interests. So if I was interested in history, they let me go to a bunch of battlefields and read a bunch of books and do whatever. I was interested in computers, installed one in my room as soon as my dad brought one home. Like I was all over it. I didn't spend any of my childhood on busy work or like being treated like a child. My peers were my father's engineering friends who were at NASA and doing other cool stuff. And I was used to communicating with them. To me, it was perfectly normal as a teenager to talk to a 40-year-old engineer who was building the thrust and propulsion system for a probe that was going to Jupiter. Like I benefited enormously from time around competent adults. And if you look at the studies, that is the number one thing for intelligence of children, is the number of hours they get to spend with adults, especially their parents. And so I give my parents enormous credit for the extra work and time and patience that it took to homeschool me those first 6 years. Eventually, they didn't have the finances to keep doing it. I went into public school, but man, those kids were stunted.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It wasn't just academically; they couldn't look you in the eye. They couldn't articulate themselves. They didn't have a vocabulary. I felt like I was an adult surrounded by a bunch of kids. And so they would try peer pressure. It's like, oh, you're like a little 12-year-old, try to peer pressure. Like, I don't care. Like my peers are adults. Like, and so I felt so outside of that experience that I ended up spending my entire high school experience building tech companies because I was so bored in school.
Right.
Like there was no age requirement in Delaware at the time to incorporate. So I made my own company. I built an online publishing company. And I would do an internship, a work release from school, and give myself an A at the end of the quarter. Like Dave did a good job checking this out. Like, so if you're bored and motivated, you can kind of skirt around the system. And so, by time I was 19, by time I was building the biodiesel company, I had basically done thousands of hours of research and realized that the price of oil was going to go from $20 a barrel to $100 a barrel. This is back in like 2004, 2005. Energy wasn't running out, but it was going to get more expensive, right? All these new techniques for getting oil were going to make it much more expensive. And so I realized, wow, diesel prices are going to go from $1 a gallon to $3 a gallon. Hey, but I can make biodiesel for $2. That's an interesting opportunity. So I went and created the company, helped hire all the engineers, raise the capital. We ended up building a 5 million gallon a year biodiesel facility in Maryland to convert poultry fat into biodiesel. Sort of a little niche play, but it was a great, way for me to drop out of college. And, because I had agreed with my parents I wasn't going to drop out until one of my companies finally took off. And I was pretty sure that was going to happen. They were a little skeptical, but so I ended up spending one one semester in college, right? So, but when I was interacting with those engineers, they pretty quickly realized that I knew more about the subject than they did, and then they didn't care, right? Like I had shown my knowledge and my credentials and the fact that I understood these technologies very deeply. And so, yes, that's uncommon for 19-year-olds, but my brother likes to joke I was born 40. And so
Yeah.
I've sort of finally reached the age at which I acted when I was young. But and that same advantage came in for Bitcoin. So I had spent a lot of time studying economics, right? I was one of those Ron Paul guys in 2007, audit the Fed and the Fed.
You and me both.
Yeah. And why did we care about that? One, ethically, I hated the corruption and the fact that they were just destroying the value of my money. Like that's a basic thing. But then you go read Hayek, and you go read Mises, and you go read, Rothbard and all these great economists. And you're like, yep, there's a lot of wisdom here. And there's a lot of pent up demand and growth that's not happening because of all these governmental restrictions, because of, the way that the Federal Reserve operates. And so I was very open. That for me, that economics journey was like 2007, 2008. By 2011, 2012, like I was ready. I was looking for an alternative to
and you it's almost like the timing of your interest graph there. You became interested in economics and went down that rabbit hole right as we had the ultimate proof point of why the current system was not the right solution. Yes. For the next 100 years. It had worked from 1913 till now. It had done all the things that it did, and it is what it is, right? It is what we have. But you also kind of happen to be in the knee-deep thrust of forming your own opinions around it, and then boom, you get the ultimate use case of the GFC, and you go, see? Like, perfect. Like, and then Satoshi's white paper hits, and that goes, bing, okay, maybe this is interesting. And then 3 years later, you find yourself kind of in a position where you can do something about it.
Yes. So it was the economics, but it was also practical on the technology side. After building the biodiesel project, I actually built a company. Do you remember Second Life, the virtual?
Yeah. We were sitting next to Phil. Actually, I literally look up the other day. This room was incredible. Like I reconnected with you, which was awesome and super grateful for. I saw Stornetta, which I haven't seen him in 4 years. We spent some time together quite heavily during the Wyoming stuff about 4 years ago, but I haven't seen Scott Stornetta, who invented the blockchain. 3 of the 8 sources in Satoshi's white paper are Haber and Stornetta. So Scott Stornetta's sitting there. I'm going, oh my God, of course he's here. And then Phil Rosedale's there, and I'm going, oh my God, I never met him. Like, here's Second Life. He was at our table sitting between you and me, and I'm like, what a serendipitous moment that is,
Yeah. And I had been building a company inside of Second Life in 2005, in 2006.
Like right when it had started, basically.
Right when it had started, but also when it hit its limit. So what people forget about Second Life is, why didn't it take off? It was on this amazing trajectory. It grew from nothing to 5 million users. There were all these stories in the news about people becoming millionaires and building projects and digital real estate. The truth is, what happened in January of 2007, the regulators knocked on the door of Linden Labs, the company in California that he was running, and said, hey guys, do you know what people are doing in the world? They're building casinos. They're building stock markets. They're doing money transmission. None of this is legal, right? Those all require licenses. You have to shut all of that down.
Right.
And so this amazing experiment and the Linden dollar and the online economy that they were creating basically collapsed overnight as they pushed out every interesting use case, because like the Linden employees basically just showed up and was like, hey guys, I see you built this financial thing. Yeah, you have to turns out all of that requires license. You have to turn all of it off. And it became another game. It became a cool niche online community for people that wanted to use avatars, but like it wasn't the global economy that it could have been or could have grown into. And so when I saw Bitcoin in 2012, my first thought was, this is an uncensorable Linden dollar.
Yeah, this is an unstoppable asset without an issue, where they can be sent in micropayments.
Yep. And there's no company in California. There's no CEO's door they're going to knock on. It's all open source. They're not going to be able to shut this thing down. And And even if I was concerned that they might shut it down, I felt like I had to lean in and do everything I possibly could to make sure they didn't shut it down. Right. And that had to do with like, how fast can we build stuff on top of this so it's unstoppable? And that was a lot of the origin of the paper on decentralized applications. It's like, how do you take that model Bitcoin pioneered and apply it to other projects? Right.
And then for those who may have read about it, but a lot of the listeners here, this is fascinating and new information for them, so they don't really understand the kind of constraints that existed in early days of Bitcoin as a settlement layer and as a, because people get confused. There's Bitcoin, the network, and then there's Bitcoin, the currency, which is an application that lives on top of it. And so everybody thinks about Bitcoin, they think about the currency, 21 million units and, a hard capped and like all that. But what they don't realize is a decentralized application, or something that you kind of coined the phrase for and wrote the paper on, where you're putting business logic on top of a transaction settlement layer that is immutable and also transparent, meaning available to anyone who can visit the address, and unstoppable. Business logic, the application of that, ran into some scale constraints and some other constraints because of the state of the Bitcoin network, which is what thrust people into innovating like Vitalik to go launch Ethereum, to try and figure out a way where we could do this, right? And so there was this whole kind of splintering that you were there, but you kind of coined it. So I'm curious, what was your purview of, I want to do this on top of Bitcoin? Because you said that very clearly multiple times in this interview so far. What did you feel like you couldn't? Did you feel like it didn't matter? Like, what happened? What was your decision tree like when you kind of ran into the physics constraints of it at that time?
So, having spoke at the first Bitcoin conference back in 2013 and helped with forming BitAngels, we had supported projects like Mastercoin, which was the first protocol that put assets onto Bitcoin. Right. Mm-hmm. This is where Tether would launch in 2014, 2015, the first stable coin. Right? All of that was built on Bitcoin. But to say the Bitcoin developers were not fans is a understatement. They were openly hostile to this idea that people were shoving these other applications into Bitcoin. They're like, hey guys, the engineering is really complex. We've only really figured out the token thing. We don't want a bunch of attack vectors. Please don't do anything. And in fact, anything that isn't just the currency is an attack on Bitcoin.
You can understand that perspective, but not just even then, but especially then, because again, they were taking on the global monetary system.
Sure.
And you get one chance to do that right. And you're going to get enough attacks just from that, if it ever scales and if it ever works. And so you can understand, and I'm not justifying one way or the other. I'm saying, if you look back at history, you can understand why the core developers were focused on that in the early days, because, and then you also understand why the innovators were going, no, but you don't understand. This is what's going to make that useful, and that'll make it harder. So you had an argument on either side, right? This will make it useful because you will create velocity to this currency that you care so much about, that's pure and that's incorruptible, and you'll have it so spread out and decentralized that it'll be harder to take down because you'll have a community of people that have adopted it,
right?
And then it becomes just who's right.
So that's a good steelman argument for their approach. Like, hey, we're taking on 20 trillion, $30 trillion monetary unit. Like, that's already a big enough market. We can do this. The counterpoint would be like, look, if a couple of startups publishing transactions you don't like on the network is going to kill it, then like you got to work more on it being more robust anyway. And so
right.
I remember at one point there was one developer, I think it was Luke Jr., who specifically released a mining patch, and everybody that was using his mining software, unbeknownst to them, all of a sudden were blocking all Mastercoin transactions. They were filtering them as spam on the network, and they kind of blew up in his face. Like, there was a Reddit thread and like, wait a minute, censorship on Bitcoin, and like people stopped using the software, but it never stopped Mastercoin from working. And there was a lot of nuclear options where like, all right, guys, like we wanted to put it in the op return, which is the official place you're supposed to put metadata, but we can't shove it into the UTX code and it'll never be prunable. Like, work with us here. Like we're trying to do the right thing. We're Bitcoiners. We want Bitcoin to succeed. So, but there was a lot of friction. And that was the environment in which Vitalik offered his original paper, which was about scripts on Bitcoin, basically expanding Bitcoin's functionality to do what we'd call smart contracts today. But we just talked about running, computer scripts on Bitcoin. And basically the developers told him, get out of here, kid. Nobody wants your smart contract thing. And so he's like, okay, I guess I'll start it, because he was a Bitcoiner, right? He was writing.
Well, and he started out covering it through Bitcoin Magazine, I think, or Why Bitcoin. I can't remember. The first Bitcoin magazine I got, I think, was in early 2013. It was called Why, the letter Y, Bitcoin. I want to believe it was July of 2013. I got it, and
I think that was David Bailey, and
that might have been David Bailey before they merged it all into Bitcoin Magazine as it is today. But I think Why Bitcoin was the first magazine I got in July of 2013. Still see the issue on it. And Vitalik at one point worked for one of those rags. Like he wrote, he was a journalist before he started this, which is why he had that perspective, because he was covering it and he's going, well, this is interesting, but this is what it should and could do.
Yep, exactly. It was funny. I met Vitalik the first time was, I think August of 2013. He was running the check-in table at the Bitcoin conference in Atlanta. And there were all of like 100, 200 people there. And it was hosted, I think, by Jeffrey Tucker, the economist. And still during like the early libertarian wave, when Bitcoin had hit $100 and that was a big deal. And it was making its run to 1,000, right? And, we really hit it off. And I ended up sharing the DAPs paper. He shared an early version of the Ethereum paper. This is back when Skype groups were a thing. And you put your friends into a Skype group and you'd chat back and forth. And so that's sort of where Ethereum was born. It was a little Skype group of us talking about like how to, do this kind of stuff on Bitcoin. And then it became clear it needed to be its own project, and like just hundreds of people piled in. There was all this pent up demand for people that wanted to do, smart contracts on Bitcoin, but have been told no. And so I think it ended up for the best, right? Different protocols focused on different trade-offs. And that's true of programming languages. That's true of tech stacks. That's true everywhere in technology. It's okay.
Right.
Like network effects specialize, and Ethereum is king of smart contracts, and Bitcoin is king of digital gold, and that's fine. Like that's a great outcome. But Ethereum unleashed this wave of innovation, and you had all these new projects that had an easy platform to build on, and so that's when you got the ICO wave in 2016-17. That's when you saw the DeFi summer emerge in 2020. You now have all these stable coins have exceeded the payment volumes of Visa on an annual basis now. It's really become mainstream. So yeah, the industry's come a long way. So,
we met in funny story for those listening to this. So, in 2017, I'm at I'm through the holidays, and I am bringing in the new year of, I want to believe it was 2018. And in October of that year, I went down with Travis Wright, who I wrote a book with at the end of 2016, to the Cayman Islands for the first time. And we were going to do this thing on customer experience being the only commodity, or the only thing that isn't a commodity. And we had written a book called Digital Sense, and we had foretold in that, where things were going, right? With everything from 5G and then, like blockchain, like all this different stuff. Like these are the things you need to be thinking about as a leader and a marketer moving forward. But ultimately it's going to come down to this customer experience journey that every human's going to go on with your business. And so we had this whole thing, and I was like, we're going down and we're going to do this talk in Cayman Enterprise City, which was this effort down there to kind of bring, startups and developers and stuff from all different walks of life. And about 30 days before it, I found out that they had just signed up 52 new companies, which was a record. Like they had this whole program where you get a residence visa for 5 years, renewable for another 4. They streamlined the process. It was brilliant, and brand new campus. And so we were doing this thing at the Ritz for like 35 people, and we're going to do it on Digital Sense and customer experience, promote the book. And a month before, it was like we had 52 companies sign up, and they're all blockchain. And I'm like, well, they don't want to hear about what we're talking about then, so we have to reframe it. And Travis and Joel had just launched in July of that year, kind of just to learn what they were doing. They had launched the Bad Crypto podcast. And the thesis around that was, they said to me, they were like, we're doing this thing. We talk about this all the time. We're just going to start recording it, put it out there. This was like 1,000 episodes ago, right? So, and I said, we're thinking about calling it the Bad Crypto Podcast because we don't know what the hell we're talking about. So it's bad. And I was like, it's brilliant, right? I'm like, because essentially what you're doing is you're saying, learn while we learn. In other words, like, we're going to go learn about all this crazy stuff in real time, and you can just kind of learn along with us. I was like, it's perfect, because the promise and the value prop is just you're bringing me along for the ride as you uncover what you didn't know before, and it's great. So they had launched that in July, and they had hit like several thousand downloads in the first month, organic, with no marketing. So it was obvious to me, right, with pattern recognition, that something was happening finally, right? Like there was about to be a wave. Yep. And so we did this thing in October, and there was like 35 people smashed in this villa right inside of the thing. And it was like, no one wanted to leave. And so then I'm like, okay, we're going to do the World Tokenomic Forum. So Travis and I came kind of like sitting around the table, probably one or two deep, maybe on a cocktail or something, going like, what are we going to call it? And he goes, well, that spells WTF. My wife hated it. And I was like, well, yeah, we don't want to be like, it's got to be something that could be a through line for this conversation, because there's going to be pirates over here just doing the Wild West thing. And then there's going to be everybody else, enterprises and governments and everybody just going, nope, status quo, trying to hold on to power. And there has to be a place to have a safe conversation that brings these two parties together. That's the thing we can serve. So we started that. So anyway, fast forward, I'm doing this thing at South by several months later, because when I was at CES promoting the book, all anybody was talking about in the airport, at the baggage claim, in the lobbies, in the thing, no one was talking about consumer electronics. Everyone was talking about Bitcoin, Ethereum, this ICO, that ICO. And it was like palpable, right? And so I went to South by's calendar, and I was like, what do they have on blockchain and, crypto and whatever? And out of the however many hundred things they had that year, there was 5 pieces of content that had one of those words in it. And I just was like, that's a miss. I'm like, they have no idea. So I created this side event called Blockhouse ATX. It was originally called Blockhouse South by Southwest. And then I got cease and desisted 4 times and threatened, because I didn't realize you couldn't use that without paying $5,000 a day. So I immediately retracted it and changed the video to beep it out. And it just said Blockhouse ATX, which was the airport code. And so we go down there, we do this thing, and we have 300 people a day, kind of all free. And, in this house on 6th called the Graber House, which you probably know well. And then I did this side house for like where I wanted to meet people. And we called it the chairman's house for no other better reason. And so long story longer, guys, what happened was we had a very curated process, because I didn't want to be like, I wanted that house to be kind of a safe place where like you could get away from the noise, and it could be the backyard, old school days of South by, where people wrote checks or people did deals, and they felt like they weren't going to get harassed if they were somebody. And so we did this chairman's house thing, and we had like this whole process of Chatham House rules, and you got to be invited and you got to be curated. And so my wife calls me out, because she was over there managing that experience, and I was coming back from Gary Vee's thing or something at the other house, and she's like, there's this guy here, and I don't know if we should let him in. And I'm like, okay, I'll be right there. So I show up, and there's like this gate around the house, and it's like on 4th and like near where the new Oracle building is, for those who know Austin now. But at the time it was like still under development. And so there's this guy standing there, and he's kind of dressed like casual, and I don't know if I should let him in or not. And it's David Johnston. And so like, I'm like, listen, bro, I don't want to be a dork or a jerk, but like, we have a process. And he was so humble about it. And he was just like, and it's funny thinking about that now. We joke about it, because I almost bounced you, and that would have been a big mistake. So, yeah. But I think you have such an interesting lens now. So between agentic AI, which now I think is hit its kind of, call it 2013 moment, maybe it's totally different, but trying to use your kind of roadmap, like maybe it's 2017 moment, it'd be more accurate. Where do you think these things are now converging? What does it mean for Bitcoin? What, you can take this any road you want, whatever's top of mind for you, like before we get into what you're actually focused on doing now. But if you were to use your crystal ball based on the pattern recognition you have of being early in the rise of crypto and Bitcoin and all that, how do you think it plays out, and what is your perspective of what happens to some of these things as we converge?
Well, I've been looking forward to this moment for a long time, because I've done a lot of side quests, and one of them was I built an early AI company in 2011, 2012, right before I got into crypto, and we called it machine learning or natural language processing at the time. There were no transformers, there were no LLMs. I kind of realized I was too early in that whole process. We ended up open sourcing the technology, but I'd been waiting for the moment that AI would get good enough that it could solve the biggest problems crypto has, which is the user experience, right? Most of these projects are way too technical, smart contracts, people don't know how to use them. But if AI is the last user interface, I just talk to the machine, I just tell it what I want, you can abstract away all that complexity. It goes away, right? It can send money. You don't care what database it uses, but it's going to use crypto because it's fast and instant and reliable and programmable and all the other reasons. AI is not going to get a bank account, right? They can't pass the KYC. You probably don't want to give it your credit card, but you can put some USDC in an account and it can go spend for the things you wanted to buy, right? And so that, I think, is a magical unlock where crypto goes mainstream, and billions of people will now be using crypto and may not even know it. Because
won't care either, right?
And won't care. I saw a survey of Facebook users a few years ago. 50% of them were unaware that Facebook used the internet to provide their service. Like, it's a button on my phone. What does it have to do with websites? And that's okay, right? That's winning, is when billions of people can use your product and they don't have to understand how protocols and databases and the engineering works. Right.
Well, and it's like, I've always said similarly, it's like electricity. Like 100 years ago, we figured out how to make it affordable to put in every home that wanted it. We never built buildings the same again.
Right.
And I think we've hit a place where now, if we stay on the positive side, we've hit a tipping point with intelligence where we have our human or organic intelligence that has all the things that it has. But now we have artificial intelligence, and we just electrified the one commodity on Earth that basically controls everything, which is intelligence, right? We will never build anything the same way again, whether it's a business, an enterprise, a community organization, it doesn't matter. We will not, and we won't talk about it. Like, we don't talk about, hey, I'm going to move into a house. Does it have electricity? We don't say that to each other today, but there was a time where you did.
Yep. 100%.
And if each person had to understand how AC DC currents were organized, secured, operated, and safe to turn on a light or turn one off, then no one would care and no one would do it. And so the risk, though, is who's designing those systems. And because when we get to the point of scale, which is what I want your perspective on now, because we're basically at that point of scale, meaning we saw what Web 2 did, which broke society in ways that were not good, in my opinion. This is just Chris's opinion. You may not have the same opinion, but as much as it connected us, it created endless number of issues because it was built on top of what I call the advertising industrial complex. And we basically weaponized
100%.
Ad spend. And Web3's brilliance and promise was to kind of put this notion of personal data and private, put it back into, make me part of the equation again as the user, so that cost per million, that CPM revenue unit that Facebook or Twitter or whoever has that they've cornered has to at least be now carved up if I want it to. But, again, people don't care about that because it's too much to think about, right? They just want to share their photos or do whatever. But at the end of the day, if we put AI in its current scale on top of Web 2 infrastructure, I've argued that that's the end of the world, because you can't create the outputs at the exponential level that they are coming now with AI on top of an advertising industrial complex without essentially having us all suffer. So this convergence that you're saying of the token economy with AI and its token economy is the biggest opportunity we've had, the one we've been waiting for. But how do we get it right?
So having learned the lesson from 2013 and writing the DAPs paper, it really helps to give something a name. So in early 23, I wrote the Smart Agents paper. It's like, hey guys, if we want AI to go well, to all the points you just made, you really want to own your AI. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you got a Web3 wallet and you can hold the private key. And if it's not your key, it's not your AI. A bunch of these big companies have been LARPing and pretending they're giving you a personal AI. It's not your AI. That AI works for Google. It works for OpenAI. It works for Claude. It's making them money. It's not care. It doesn't care about making you money, right? I want an AI that is a fiduciary to me, right? That's trying to make money for me. And the only way we get there is with smart contracts and Web3 tools. And so I came to the same conclusion you did in early 23, and have basically spent every day since doing anything in my power to push the power to the edge of the network, right? Use open source models. Here's Morpheus. This lets you access those models even if you don't have the powerful hardware, right? You can pay somebody else to run the GPU. Great. Now we've got that piece. You've seen OpenClaw come out recently. That's the personal AI, right? That's the coordinator. Great. Now I can connect my Morpheus inference to my OpenClaw. Great. Now I own the inference. I own the data. I own a Mac Mini. I own the hardware. I can own the whole thing now, which has come about just in time, because I agree with you. You're going to see Web 2 on steroids. For people that don't own their AI, they're going to get owned by somebody else's AI.
Well, and here's that in real terms. So I saw a post on X today. I don't have it in front of me, so I can't reference it, but I'll put it in the show notes. And it hit on the thing that I've been thinking about a lot, and you probably have thought about a lot since 2023, which was, now you have Claude Cowork, you have all these things, right? And I want to hear your perspective. For me, I'm actually asking this question right now, and I really want to understand how you think about it, because your architecture actually, I think, would be better or mine as I try and figure it out. So this notion of memory, right? So one of the biggest complaints for those who have used AI, if you haven't used it, you got to start, because you have to get context, and there's ways to start simply without overwhelming yourself. And you're normally going to start by picking one of the models. You pick whatever one you want, Anthropic, OpenAI, doesn't matter which one, and pay it $20. This is my opinion, my advice. Pay it the $20 a month. You can cancel it anytime, but it is a drastically different experience than the free version, which means you'll actually start to see how easy it is to talk to and what kind of outputs you get. You'll be blown away. But just start. And so if you haven't started, you need to start. But if you start and you do that and you containerize that kind of risk there, where you can't really hurt yourself, but you're getting some context, then what you quickly find out is memory, like it remembering what you gave it as a project, as a thread, whatever. It's limited, or it's been limited. Now it's continuing to get better every single day by a factor of double, because they're competing like hell. But this post today hit on the one issue that you and I have been thinking about probably in parallel worlds for the last 3 years is, okay, yeah, but that's not actually necessarily good. Meaning you solve the persistent memory issue, and now I'm paying you a subscription to Claude or to OpenAI, to Gemini. It doesn't matter. They all do the same thing. So one week one will be better than the other and whatever. But if I'm doing that, now I'm putting all my intelligence into my personal AI. I'm doing that, and it's remembering things. And it's so good because it's remembering things I didn't even know I forgot. It's learning my blind spots. It's learning how to personalize the responses in my voice and tone, which are all useful, which allow me to publish more content, allow me to do better work, allow me to do all these benefits. But what I'm doing is I'm training it how to basically teach me not to think for myself anymore and manipulate me. And now I have to lease back my cognition from this platform forever.
Yep.
And so, again, for some people to hear that, they're immediately just going to go, see, I get, but here's the point. You can't stop this future. So the first pill everyone has to swallow is this is inevitable. The cement has been poured, how I like to say it. You can choose to put your personal fingerprints in it in one way or another way, but you have got to rapidly take interest in this, even if you're non-technical, because just like literacy is the difference between poverty and wealth in most countries. It's actually the root cause of poverty is how literate someone is. This is a new language that is English first, meaning you just speak to it. And yet you don't know the words. So you have to start to know what markdown means. And not because you wanted something new to learn, but because you will be illiterate.
Yep, 100%. The people who came to me when OpenClaw hit a few weeks ago, VCs, executives, high net worth, family offices, lawyers, accountants. They weren't engineers.
Right.
They had seen the power of it, and all of a sudden they could talk to it in a chat app, and they didn't have to, be an engineer to use it. There's a huge amount of interest and demand for that. And this has been the fastest growing software program of all time. It went from zero to mainstream in a matter of weeks. And then the founder, Peter, took some giant exit, $5-10 billion. We don't know what the official number is, but a huge exit from OpenAI to go work there. Now, the software is still open source. Anybody can use it, but like they saw the future very quickly. And the hunger for this, people are setting up agencies that do nothing but get these high net worth people onto OpenClaw. People are paying out $2K a pop. Just get my machine set up. I just want to talk to it. I just want an executive assistant, a chief of staff that runs 24/7 and does all my work. Great. Like there is demand for that. In fact, I've heard from 2 companies in the last 48 hours that they have mandated every employee has to have an agent. And if they can't show that it's doing more than 50% of their work by next month, they're laid off.
Well, and Jack, who founded Twitter, now X, came out yesterday. I don't know if you saw the post where he shared what he wrote to the employees. Did one massive cut, 6,000. I think they cut to 6,000. So they cut almost 45% of the workforce.
Yep.
And you can find the article. I think he did. I think he deployed as much empathy and also clarity and transparency in what was a tough decision. I respect Jack personally. People may have different opinion. I think he's done a hell of a job, but it was one of those things where you go, here's someone who obviously has been a visionary, block Twitter, right? Like this person knows what they're doing and they can see the future. They've demonstrated that multiple times now. And they just laid off 45% of their workforce, and they didn't want to lay off the people. And they were very transparent why they did it, and why they didn't do multiple rounds and all that. And so you go, okay, well, that's the negative. But if you're a family office, if you're high net worth, and this is the people that we've worked with and I talk to, I've been saying forever, like this is beyond your technical thing. This is a risk vector. This is a personal OPSEC vector. This is we launched a piece today. I'll share it with you because I don't think you've seen it on the Substack with my estate and asset protection team and attorneys. We launched a series today that is all about your dorm room repo can blow up your balance sheet, right? And because every rich family out there, regardless of what you think is rich, everyone who has something to lose, if they have a teenager, their teenager is doing this. But unlike like dabbling in other Second Life type things, the power of what OpenClaw is, or the power of even Cowork, like these things are both job security for the future, but they are also a wild west. And you put it out in the open source and it becomes someone else's infrastructure and something bad happens. Did you have that in the right legal container to separate it from the personal trust from everything else? Because someone will be looking for someone to sue. So there's like so many elements of this that you cannot ignore, even if you're non-technical, which is why I think you said your phone's seeing people that are non-technical going, what do I do about this? They're not doing it because they're worried about their job or just the stocks, going down and whether they're short or go long. There's an internal anxiety that realizes I haven't figured out how to containerize this new thing yet.
Yep, 100%.
And so what is your approach been to them? I'm curious, like, how do you help them calm down so that they can kind of speed up their decision making in an order that makes sense? What are some of the things that have worked? Because I think we can learn a lot from you in that regard. I'm trying to be more effective onboarding people without scaring the hell out of them too. But I also don't want them to think it's something they could ignore. So what have you learned in your conversations that you did right or wrong or whatever that we could glean?
So step number 1, don't put this on your laptop, right? Drop the 600.
What? Don't put any of it, or don't put OpenClaw specifically?
Well, I canceled my OpenAI subscription a long time ago because of the data privacy issues that you pointed out. But specifically, don't put OpenClaw with root access to everything on your laptop, right? That's where a lot of the stories have come from. Right. And somebody connects it directly to their main email account.
Or on their network or anything.
Yeah. It emails their boss. Oh, my owner is too busy. He would like to quit his job, right? Like, stuff like that. So spend the $600, get a Mac Mini, put it on dedicated hardware, and then treat it like an employee. Give it its own email account, its own GitHub account, like whatever tools it needs. Don't make them your credentials. Give it its own credential, right? And think of it as your assistant. So treat it the same way you would onboard an employee, and they have access to certain information. They're on dedicated hardware. They're on dedicated accounts. And you have to be very specific about outcomes you want, right? Because it'll get creative on how it accomplishes that. Like, oh, I want to buy a house, and messages a million people. Like, okay, well, maybe that was a little overboard. I want a house in this area under this price, message these 10 realtors, right? So you end up having to get more specificity. You want to articulate. The better you articulate what you want, the more powerful the tool can be at giving you that outcome. But I would say it's evolving fairly rapidly. OpenClaw has had a ton of security updates. They've spent a lot of the last 2 weeks, sort of closing a lot of those gaps. Because remember, this was an experimental open source.
I mean, literally, it's February 27th as we're recording this, and I only say that because January 27th, OpenClaw had the book moment, right? That was what put it on everybody's radar.
Yep.
So we are less than 30 days from what I consider to be the world never being the same.
Yep, 100%. That was a big moment. And it proved that there was a huge demand for these personal AI. So people are rolling out secure versions. Look at Ironclaw and what the folks at Near have done. Here's a Rust version that is, more secure than what's running over in OpenClaw. So maybe for the 16-year-old kid, he doesn't care, but the family office sure does, right?
Well, and the family office of that 16-year-old kid wants to ask, which one are you using?
Which one are you using? Let me give you.
By the way, if I say Claude, does that mean anything to you there, Junior? Yeah, Dad. No, Dad. Like, you want to have that conversation today, just not in a threatening way, but like, find out what your kids know and don't know, and don't precede it. Just go. If I see the word claw to you, does that mean anything? Right. Any of your friends talking about that?
Oh,
because you'll find out whether you need to escalate or whether you have time in a hurry.
Yeah. Well, and have the conversation now, right? Almost 100% of students are using AI in one form or another at this point. They're just taking a picture.
They're all trying to figure out whether they're going to have a job. And my thing is, you may not know, and your kid may not know, but they have a friend who made 50 grand this week in prediction markets deploying a claw, and it's only a matter of time before they get sucked into that. And they're not going to know, or they're not going to ask the questions that they should ask because they're a kid.
Yep.
They're not wrong or bad. Their intentions are in the right place.
Sure. Well, even if they don't have a data leak, even if they don't do something, inadvertently illegal, just the cost. You can run up a $5,000-$10,000 Claude bill. My family office, we were spending $250 a day in Claude credits, right? Because this thing is so powerful and addictive. You just want to keep using it. Oh, I'm getting all this work done. And so I rolled a version called Everclaw that integrates Morpheus. So you can use the open source models. And I cut my bill by 90% just by doing that, right? And so this is on everclaw.xyz. You can set it up today. Go to app.more.org. You can grab a key from Morpheus to use the inference. Like, those two steps alone will just save you 90%. Because unless you're doing like serious coding work, you probably don't need Claude 4.6. Like, the open source models are not far behind. They're maybe 30 days at this point.
Break that down for people that don't know what the hell you're talking about in general, but that don't even know what open source models mean. I want to make sure that we don't skip over something, right? So Claude 4.6 is Anthropic's latest release. Yep. There's, obviously there's 4.5. There's all these different things. Some do coding, some do writing, some do that. If you've heard of Cowork or Coworker, these are very specific Claude agents, meaning they are owned by Claude, but you can deploy them for a fee, and they will do things like answer your email, or they will do different work tasks. So before you build your own AI using something of like an OpenClaw or one of its derivatives now that is more secure to create agents that you own and control, you could go lease an agent for $20 a month or $200 a month from Claude, Anthropic, and have these utilities work. And so when you say open source models, now what you're talking about is not OpenAI. You're not talking about Anthropic. You're not talking about Google Gemini. You are talking about things that you can go download that have 40, 50 billion, trillion parameters. So they are on par with the big hyperscaler, like the big players, but they are free. And one of the ones you may have heard of is DeepSeek. If you've been following Substack for a while, you heard me write about that when that came out. That was the Chinese one, but they open sourced it. But I want to give people context. When you say open source models, talk to us about what ones you're talking about. Give us a list so they kind of understand where they sit next to the closed source models.
So one of the first ones that came out was Meta released the Llama models.
Right.
So Llama 1, Llama 2, they're now on like Llama 3.3. And it's just a generally powerful model for writing anything, right? So if I want to write an essay or summarize notes from a big meeting, I'll just drop it into Llama. It does a great job of summarizing, an hour-long conversation, give me a 3-pager, right? And the next steps. Like Llama's fine for that. There's all these image models, right? So there's all these image models like, oh, I want to create branding or a marketing or a website thing. Great, they're image models. Now there are video models, but the latest thing are all these coding models. I've been testing a lot of them. The best one that I've found is GLM5. And I would say that's equivalent to like a Claude 4.5. So not their latest model, but the one from a month ago or 2 months ago. Like it's kind of reached that same parity. So
and you say when you say it's reached that parity, from your perspective, like, is it related to speed per token count? Is it related to lack of error, like quality? But like, what does it mean when it's almost as good as the latest state of the art from Anthropic? Because I don't know what you mean when you say that, but I know you think about it a certain way. So if I'm trying to deploy code using an open source model or a cloud model, regardless, what does good mean? And what does state of the art mean today as we record this?
So the best metric, I think, is if you've seen that Meter is an organization that ranks the different models. If you've seen their chart that shows how long a task, long measured in like human time, how long would it take somebody to do a 1-hour task or a 4-hour task or an 8-hour task, that's been rising exponentially. And Claude 4.5 was the breakout moment. All of a sudden, it could do 4-hour tasks, and it was 50% likely to succeed, right? But you backed it off a little bit. You gave it a task that was like an hour too long, and it would get done 90% of the time, right? So that was the magic moment when it went from like a little.
And when we talk about a 4-hour task, we're talking about in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and it only takes 10, 15 minutes to do your 4-hour task. Now that's
Right.
a hell of a multiple.
And it was 50% accurate, and that was at Claude. That was at Claude Sonnet 4.5.
Yep.
Claude 4.6
now does 11 to 12-hour tasks at that 50% rate, or almost a full day's worth of work, let's say at a 90% success rate. So I can give it a task like go build this website, and it'll just one shot get the whole thing done. Would have taken me all day to design and build and code, and looks great. I'll give it a couple of tweaks and done.
Right. And so if I back it off, meaning if I gave it an 11-hour, if I hired David Johnston at his top rate and all his, whatever he needed, his front end, back end devs, his secured, his CISO guys. And in other words, if I just said, make this thing work, make it secure, and I need it to be live, how long is it going to take? If you broke that out in a scope, which would take 11 hours for a development firm to build the scope, by the way, like if you broke out that in a scope and it was 11 hours of work per day, Claude 4.6 and models of that caliber are doing it in minutes and roughly at a 50% accuracy rate. But if I chunked it, if I took 4.5 hours of it and I did 3 things, it's going to be at a 90% hit rate, and I'll have it in 30, 45 minutes.
Yep.
And that's today's state of the art, which is double from what it was, a month or so ago. Codex 5.3 is the OpenAI competitor, right? If I'm most accurate, I think Codex 5.3 is the model that does coding on OpenAI stack that is the closest to Claude Sonnet 4.6. Neither one of these is your personal owned AI coding engine. That you would use GLM5 if you take David's advice or something like it. There's Quencoder, there's several, right? So if you were just getting started and you wanted to test this, and you didn't care about 11 hours and 10 minutes or 11 hours and 5 minutes, right? Like you didn't care. It wasn't mission critical.
Right.
Because again, 11 hours down to 1 hour is an order of magnitude, right? So if you just wanted to get a feel, do you recommend that people start with the cloud providers, or do you think it's a mistake and something you can just leap around and that your learning curve is going to be just as valuable and more secure if you go and I'm asking your personal opinion because I've heard different people say different things.
I would start with the one that you can own. because people tend to continue the way they start, right? If you slash the credit card and you start on Claude, you start to get used to their tools, and I don't want to adopt something else. I'm not worried about privacy, or I'm not worried about owning the data. And you won't feel the consequences of that for a year or two, whatever time.
Right. By the time you feel the consequences of the quiet, you won't be able to get out of it.
Correct. It'll be a lot more difficult. Lost all.
Well, I say this from my own pattern recognition. Between 21 and 22, when we had lost touch for a while, we reverse engineered. We built it on top of the Cardano stack. I know you know Charles too from your walks of life, but we had built it at the time on Cardano as a decentralized ID to take possession of a mobile phone that had a dual operating system, where one side was walled off, separate hard drive, separate SIM, separate everything, fully encrypted, peer-to-peer, like the old Palm Pilot. And that was my inner circle. We called it zero mode. And then we had another mode that was basically 90%. It was a hard fork off of Android, de-Google. You could add Google in, but we told you why you didn't want to. And when I say you can't, it's too late. What I learned through that is like these integrations are at the chipset level. They're at the, I mean, they are so ingrained that when you are used to a platform, the pain of switching is not only a UX error, it's literally almost cognitively impossible. Like your whole world stops. So if you're new to this, what I heard you say that I thought was actually interesting, I'm going to take that advice, because I'm kind of deciding myself, how much do I play in the cloud world versus on my own stack? And that's why I was asking you as much personal as it was anything else. Like, learn where you're going to own it. Like, if you're going to learn something new every single day and break your brain on this and have fun doing it, why would you then learn, other than if you want context to help somebody else make that decision? Why would you learn on something you're ultimately going to abandon?
Yep.
If you're wise, and if you're a high net worth family, and if you're a family office, and if you're any of those things, there's no reason not to own your agents. And I love the thing I want to repeat again that you said, treat it like an employee, because we don't think of it that way, because it's so smart. And it's only going to get smarter, right? And eventually in a year, it'll be smarter than all humanity combined. But that's actually the more reason to treat it like a half-drunk intern, right? Because you would never give your half-drunk intern the keys to your entire personal architecture of your privacy and your entity structures and your holdcos and your trust. Like, you would never do that to a new hire.
Right. And
no matter how smart they were.
And you wouldn't give away your core competency to a consultant.
Right.
That's what you're doing when you're renting your intelligence from these others, is you're handing all of your core competency to a third party that is not aligned with your interest, who's not a fiduciary to you, who can take that information and use it however they want, right?
Meaning, like, if you have a certain view of how to write, how to market, and you put that into these other engines, essentially that data is theirs now. And so you're getting an output that's better and more productive for you, but they're modeling you for the next person who isn't you, so that person get a better output. And meaning, like, you just gave your IP or your trade secret to an engine owned by.
And a lot of people aren't going to care. Let's say that, okay, OpenAI gets better based on my data, but like, they're literally taking your relationships and all of the context and your network and the numbers and the names and the details of all of those relationships. Because for a lot of families and high net worth folks, their network is their most valuable thing, right? And that's how they move the capital. Those are the vendors they trust. Those are the experts they work with. Those are the friends and co-investors that they have. They're the LPs in their fund, right? The VCs they have relationships with. Like, all of that is your core competency. And if you give that away, you're not going to have a lot left in a couple of years, right? The difference between people that own their intelligence and the people that rent it is literally going to be 100x, right? And the people that own their intelligence are going to have this infinite ability to leverage their network. Otherwise, somebody else is going to leverage your network and your knowledge and your capital.
And, it's so fun. I talk with a lot of high net worth families and family office principals and things like that, and they kind of get it. And then, just like with Bitcoin, so I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Like, so I've orange pilled friends of mine that are going to be fine, way richer than me, that are basically like, look, it's at 68, Chris. Like, I should have bought it when you told me it was at 14. I'm like, you still don't get it. One Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. You either understand that, or you don't. And I go through the whole thing, and then you realize you're just trying to convince them of something. They just want to buy the IBIT ETF because that's what they understand and get in and out of it when they choose. AI is, I'm seeing it early days. I'm seeing it face a similar kind of, I don't want to call it resistance, but thought pattern amongst this specific persona that we just mentioned, a family that would meet the mark of a high net worth family, which could mean 2 to 30 million in assets on the low end, and where they don't have a lot of advisors. And it could mean, 50 to 100 million and up, where they're part of a multifamily office, or they're rich enough where they have a single family office. What I worry about is they go, yeah, but NVIDIA, I'm just going to buy NVIDIA. Or they go, I'm going to short that. Or I'm going to buy, I'm glad I banged out of IBM. Or I'm, like they look at it as a typical S&P stock. Like, they're not able to contextualize why owning my intelligence matters yet.
You're not even going to know what's real. If you don't have an agent that's advising you and giving you a sense, really acting as a firewall, right? Against all the other 200 IQ agents that are trying to manipulate and advertise to you, right? They're doing advertising now in ChatGPT. The answer is, when you're renting the intelligence from them, you're asking for the intelligence. You're not getting the intelligence. You're getting what somebody paid for you to hear or you to see, right? I had this experience recently with Google, right? I was setting a medical appointment, right? And I hadn't realized they're now jamming advertisements into Google Maps. And so I went to click on what I thought was my doctor's office, and it had me calling some other doctor's office on the other side of town because somebody had paid $10 or whatever the ad fee was to manipulate my behavior. And I found that extremely ridiculous, and sort of broke my expectations of what that product was doing for me. And I'd known this for a long time, but I hadn't realized it had gotten that bad, where they're basically just flipping, and manipulating me into going to the wrong place. But that's nothing. In a year, you're going to have that experience 10 times a day, and they'll be calling you and messaging you, and it looks like your friend, and it sounds like your friend.
And it's coming from your friend's phone number or your sister or your brother, and they're in trouble and they need your money. And we've already seen these things happen, and they are happening today and 6 months ago on that technology. And we just talked about, in the last revolution of just Claude 4.5 to 4.6, we saw a doubling in the output of complexity it can handle accurately, and a doubling of the reduction of time. And when we think about 30 days from now, and again, the arms race of, they're dropping these releases faster than they're even ready because they have to, right? And it's creating a noise level that most of you listening to this right now, if you're honest, can't keep up with, and almost want to shut down. And I empathize with that, because I've been in the space and I've been in technology since 2009. And I will be very frank, it takes a lot to not get overwhelmed some days, because the faster you go into this, the faster you realize you can't keep up. You can accept that on one regard, but then you start to see the productivity gains, like David was saying, and then you get addicted to the productivity gains, because I'm like now on steroids, and but then you go, well, wait, just because I can do it, should I do it? Like, do I really need four more projects? I got 3 kids, right? And so there's this blessing and curse of all of it. But if you aren't even in it and don't own it, we're talking about families that are used to control. They're used to owning. They're used to being the one who dictates. And it's a very hard mental shift to realize, the sooner you recognize none of us are going to actually truly be in control, but you can accept how to keep control over the agents and the family members that you care about by having them in your personal architecture, then you can at least create certainty inside of your little pocket.
Yep, 100%.
And so I think that's the biggest mental leap that people will struggle with.
Yep. Yeah, and there's no opting out. I mean, run that exponential out a year. And I was explaining this to my 10-year-old daughter, and I said, okay, well, if they can do 10 hours worth of work today, and it's doubling every month, how much can they do next month? Then I had to run out the numbers, and then next month, and I had to do that 10 times. And she's like, wow, by the end of the year, it'll be doing 2,000 hours of work per 15 minutes. That's a year's worth of human effort. by the end of this year.
With Einstein level intelligence, better than Einstein. No, in other words, it's 2,000 hours, which is an annualized human level full-time equivalent in minutes, and it's not a dork. It's in a year. It's very possible that we will have hit the point where the dumbest agent is equal to the smartest human. And every prediction I've seen from Ben Goertzel and some others who've been in the space for 30, 40 years says once we hit that, we're less than a year before the dumbest agent is smarter than all humanity.
Yep.
And so we're talking about the exponential. It's not an option to keep out. The question is, what does it mean to redefine our humanity? That's what I've been saying. So what the positive side of this is that we will actually find out for the first time, in my opinion, what it means to be human. And hopefully we'll embrace that. But that does not mean being a Luddite and ignoring this. That means living in a barbell world where you have basically full automation at scale for whatever you care about that you either lease or own. That's your option tree there, as far as I can simplify it. And then you'll be totally unplugged and experiencing and in your humanity like a dog at the beach, laughing with other dogs at the beach over here with no concern of what your owner overlord is doing. Yep. Because you've contained it in a way that at least you can sleep at night.
Yep. That's a really good way of explaining it. I saw a post on that just literally today. This woman who's homeschooling kids has basically set up Everclaw so it can do all the curriculum, it can record the sessions, and give her advice. She's like, this is wonderful. I've handed off all the burden and bureaucracy and overhead of doing this, and I'm just spending time with my kid. And now I'm just, focused on other people. I think the premium for in-person events is going to go way up because online is going to be so flooded with this content like that it'll be worthless. And all that matters are the relationships and the network and the in-person experiences.
I said this because you're old enough to remember the shift and you were in technology at the time, but I say this like in a very simple, like nowhere in comparison to the gravity of this. But I remember when Borders Bookstore was around, right before the crisis and everything, when they went bankrupt. And there was that era, and I ended up owning a publishing company between 2010 and 2012 that was a little boutique publishing focused on thought leaders and business leaders at that time, because the business model for publishers broke. Because they used to write advances and then the book would come out and then it would land in a bookstore and people would discover it and they would buy it. And so the discovery engine of new authors was bookstores because people actually went to them. Amazon comes out and creates the endless aisle, and it had all this amazing benefit for other reasons. But the one thing it did was it made it between that and social media, it put the cost burden on discoverability to someone else. And so now publishers back then would no longer write advances because 96% of them in 2009, when I started that company or bought an interest in that company, I didn't start it. 96% of earnouts didn't happen, right? In other words, I wrote you a $20,000 bonus or whatever to write your book and give you the ability to go do it, and I never get it back, right? 96% of the time. So what that meant was they were no longer betting on new authors. And Hollywood's proven this for years. They're just repackaging all the shit they know already works, right? Because they can't take a risk on something new. And so when those economics shifted, that was an example, but now we're at like a whole different world where discoverability of the tool sets, even of the next 50 open claws, which are already in production, the noise level on the people in that space, let alone outside and adjacent to that space, which is every industry, is so high, no human can keep up with it. There's no centralized trust. So discoverability, trust, in-person, human agency, these things are going to be the premium. And the exciting thing is there's only 8 billion of us. Right. And so as big of a number as that is, we become the scarce resource. Our attention, our trust becomes the scarce resource. Just like there's only 21 million Bitcoin that'll never be more of. That's digital scarcity. We become organic scarcity, and our attention and our trust is harder and more expensive to earn than ever. And once you have it, it's everything. And so the investments of the future will be in the things that can distribute to that through the lens of making it easier to discover, trustworthy, and verifiable, and help you understand your place in it. And I think that's an exciting realm to think about when you look at how it impacts these jobs in different industries. It will not change the fact that humans will still want to be around other humans.
Yep. We are very social creatures. And that's actually sort of the the most optimistic view that I've come to, which is I think people are in this narrative right now where like, oh, it'll take all the jobs and all the rest. I think it's actually the reverse. I think agents have started hiring humans. I think AI will create more jobs than there are people on Earth. There'll be 100 billion agents trying to engage with 8 billion people. And it's an open market, and they have to find the highest value thing that they can do to get that attention, to get that electricity, to get that compute, right, to justify their existence. So that's sort of the abundance. If we structure this correctly, if a bunch of humans all have the key, right, and they really own an AI and it's looking out for their best interest, we're headed to an amazing outcome.
So what's your hot take on Bitcoin then? So I had a weird thought the other day, challenging my own beliefs, because I've tried to prove to myself why Bitcoin is not a $100 trillion asset forever, right? I say it's either going to zero or it's going to take everything down, because it can't stay here, wherever here has been, right? The trading range doesn't matter, right? And we saw in the first week or two of the Molt book, kind of post January 27th, kind of that unlock, and OpenClaw being in the public vernacular and media and everything, we saw agents now kind of setting up Lightning nodes and Bitcoin wallets and starting to transact with each other. And they unlocked the ability to basically permissionlessly buy from one another, agents buying from agents. And Google just updated its, stuff to WebMCP, which basically means now we're going to make the web readable by agents, because there's going to be more agents than humans. So the internet was built for humans. Now we're going to build it for agents. And we don't really care whether the human knows that or not, because that's where we need to move. So as we think about those worlds, I thought, well, this now means that Bitcoin doesn't ever have to convince humans why it's valuable, because agents have already figured it out and they're just going to use it. And then I thought, but they might also just re-Satoshi the thing. What if they, what if they fork it? What does that mean? So what are your hot takes on the future of Bitcoin, specifically Bitcoin? Because you're not a maxi, but you're also an OG in that space. You have a lot of pattern recognition there. Where do you think agents go? I know we can't predict the future, but, are you bullish? Are you uncertain? Where do you think they go?
So let's take Bitcoin for what it is, right? It is a replacement for gold, right? It's proven scarcity as a long-term reputation. It's a way to send, a digital gold over the internet. But gold isn't everything. Gold is very valuable. It's $30 trillion market and is actually doing very well right now, because people see the uncertainty with the government currencies, right? It's hit $4,000 or $5,000 for the first time. And so I think Bitcoin will continue to take a large portion of that market, because it's much more AI native than, being able to send. I mean, it's hard to take gold anywhere and do anything with it. You end up shoving it in a vault in Switzerland, and you got a piece of paper that says you own some gold, right?
So you see it. So then you see it as it may transact in it, meaning it may send Satoshis to it, Satoshis for Satoshis. It may just send USDC or USDT or whatever stablecoin, and then store its excess in Bitcoin, because it sees it as that ultimate collateral.
Yep. And it also makes it easier, despite the passion of the Bitcoin maxis. I usually find out that they're not running a Bitcoin full node. I've been running one since 2012, but they don't run one. They talk about it a lot, but it's not easy, right? And it's not trivial to maintain. Guess what became just trivial is I just tell my agent to go run a Bitcoin node. Done. Right? And all of a sudden, you're going to have, instead of 20,000 Bitcoin nodes in the whole world, we might see a renaissance of 100,000 or 200,000.
Yeah, that's the bull case that I've made to people recently that haven't taken my 2 years, 3 years worth of indoctrination without an agenda other than to help them just preserve their wealth for a future, and say you should own some actually in a sovereign multi-sig or cold storage wallet, depending on how much it is, but you should own the actual thing. And despite my evangelism of it for 2 years, still don't do it. Just buy the ETF, do whatever. And I finally got to the point where I thought, you know what, when you make node maintenance infinitely scalable, and I can own the AI agent, and I literally, that sole job is just to maintain my Lightning node, my Bitcoin node, and keep it up to date and keep it accurate and running, and to, right, like when you do that, the decentralization that exists today in Bitcoin goes through the roof. And I find it hard to argue that the agents would see a more efficient path to that stability, given the 17-year, proof of work kind of hard infrastructure, hash rate, fluctuation, like the security of it.
Yep. Well, and the agents just reflect the intent of their owners, right? They're not going to come, as much as people have sort of
so far.
Yeah. Well, I hope that is the case. I believe in intent-based agents connected to a human. A fully autonomous agent is more like a virus. It's just out there replicating, potentially doing harmful, maybe neutral things. But intent-based, I love. That's what I love about OpenClaw is I tell it the goals. And every time it thinks,
I give it a soul. I tell it the goals. I'm in control of its birth, and that is a key thing. I don't think a lot of people that talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's an important piece. And I love that we hear a lot about the autonomous agents, and that's because that's news headlines, and that makes everybody panic, and that could sell more pharmaceuticals, right? But at the end of the day, that's a real thing. But that's just like saying, well, there's ISIS people out there and there's terrorists. Like, of course, there's bad people out there. But if you're going to be a family officer, if you're of means and you're going to protect yourself, what you could also know is you're putting an intent-based set of agents that you bore, just like you gave birth to kids and you raised them on your religion or on your value set and whatever. Like, you now have a responsibility to raise agents.
Yep. And
you're putting those intent-based agents into the universe for others to play with.
Yeah.
And that means that your impact can scale.
Yep. And I'm setting this up for my own family, for my wife, for my kids. Everybody's getting an individualized agent, but I'm setting it up in a secure way, right? But back to Bitcoin. It is digital gold, but it's not everything. Like, agents aren't going to magically rebuild 15 years of smart contracts and all the other infrastructure, a decade of infrastructure on Ethereum, right? That's network effect is over there, and most of the AI projects are on base. So not even just a Ethereum mainnet, but that second layer where they've built all the wallets and all the tools, and they have the registries, and they have X402 and the payment rails, everything the agents need. That's where Morpheus is. That's where Venice is. That's where Warden, 20 million plus users. If they're using AI and crypto, they're probably on base. And it's great. 1 penny, 1 second transaction. Bitcoin is not that. And that's okay. You can also run an Ethereum node. You can also have a Morpheus node. Having agents lets you pull these pieces together in a way that's seamless, and it can use everything for what it's best. And one of the reasons agents aren't going to reinvent Bitcoin or Ethereum is the liquidity is locked in a small pool. And that's a big part of this, right? Is you need to be able to have the liquidity in order to make all of this work.
That's a good point. So argument for that is something to noodle on, something to watch, but not likely to happen based on current state. We think that, right now, all signs point to the agents, especially the intent-based agents, will likely choose to just help us benefit from Bitcoin and those kind of utilities better because it makes their life easier. And that's how they're cybernetic mechanisms. They focus on the outcome. If you give it the intent, you give it the way, and you give it the ethos, and it needs to get an outcome, it's going to get there.
Yep.
And so likely to be very bullish for the utility and the use adoption rate of these networks that have already established themselves. We won't pick on any, we're not selling a religion here. But you can figure out that if it's a Bitcoin protocol, if it's a Ethereum based thing, if it's got real network effects, if it's a Solana, it's doing something different and unique that has proven itself and scaled, and then there's likely just going to be more of it. Yep. Because the agents are going to go out and do things that humans can't do. And that 11 hours now in 15 minutes or 2,000 hours in 15 minutes, right? That exponential outcome means the security, the maintenance, the problem solving related to some of these things benefits from that.
Yeah, 100%.
There's never been a global monetary network and settlement layer that was permissionless that had that level of workload maintaining it.
Yep, exactly. And that's a good way to think about it, is that's the big advantage here, is you're able to really access all of that power and detail, at a level that's never been possible before. And so, yeah, it's really cool to see. And, I think those network effects aren't going away, right? You could create a new fax protocol tomorrow, and nobody would care, right? Because there's you and nobody else on that new fax protocol. They're going to use the one that has a billion users. And it's the same for the internet. It's same for, everything else, right? So, they're just going to lean into those network effects. And, it's effectively the same as, they want to get work done and they want to get it done fast. You know how you get it done fast? You use the most established thing that has all the documentation and has all the other users.
Right. And the most liquidity. And I think that was a key point you brought in, because investors and high net worth people, they understand liquidity pools. They provide liquidity for markets. And so tapping into that is another big thing. The last thing you want to do is go be in a network that everything else works, but then there's no way to get your money out or liquid and move it into a different thing. Right. So, so what are the protocol choke points that regulators are going to clamp down on, whether they overreact or not? You mentioned Base. I mean, I think about, okay, that's great. But, Coinbase, centralized exchanges, things like that, like where do DEXs play a role in the future? What protocols do you think need to be built now that are now on time? Whereas maybe, to your own point earlier with Factum and stuff, you were early, you were right, but early. What do you think is timely now, and what either reemerges and finds a market finally, or what needs to be built that isn't?
So I think things continue to decentralize. Base has announced they're going to do a token, which I think is great because it signals that they're going to be validators that get a reward and people will be able to run them. And so you'll move from just having sort of the root of trust go from Base into the Ethereum network, but you'll have an additional layer of decentralization at the base layer. And most of the layer twos are headed in that kind of direction, right? Where they want to become more decentralized over time. I'm pretty optimistic on the regulatory side. There was a lot of AI doomer kind of talk in 2023. There was this whole wave, like a big moral panic of, the AIs are going to do all these bad things. A lot of that was lobbying by OpenAI and Microsoft and a few other players trying to push out the open source. Right. And the Biden administration even put out an executive order that would have banned open source, forced licenses if you wanted to develop AI in the United States, restricted the data centers, restricted the chips, all these crazy things. And there was a huge pushback from Morpheus and the other communities, like, you're not going to ban math. Come on, guys. Like, this is math, and this is America, and we have the First Amendment, and unless you're going to ban books and language and math, like, this isn't going to work. Like, we're going to fight this. And, the new administration heard that message, and Silicon Valley sort of rallied around this idea, like, no, we're not going to stop all innovation in AI. In fact, that's what we need to compete with other people who aren't going to slow down. Is we want the American models and tech to be the best. The only way to get there is through the free market, not these restrictions. So all of those restrictions got wiped away in November of 24. They just get new executive order, all restrictions gone. AI is uncensored and permissionless. Have fun. And so it's been wild to see how fast the advancements have happened, and sort of all the energy around AI came back to the United States, right? Where Europe basically shot themselves in the foot and said, we're going to regulate AI. Nobody's building anything interesting in Europe. Like, the inventor of OpenClaw is Austrian. And the first thing he did was get on a plane and come to the US and basically said, hey, I have to go to the epicenter. Like, nobody in Europe gets what I'm doing. And the Americans are willing to give me $10 billion. Like, I'll see you guys later, and so now there's all this gravity of talent and energy flowing back, which I think is immensely positive, right? And hopefully something that we can continue to see to accelerate. So who knows what happens in 3 years, but that feels like so far away. I can't even think about 3 years from now.
No, I mean, every day or every week in this space right now, we used to joke about it in crypto, and then, this, like, it was like, oh, a month in crypto is like a year. I feel like a day in AI is like a year. It's getting close to it. And so, we'll be there sooner rather than later. I think, you've done a great job, like, boiling the ocean here with a multitude of topics. What is the one thing we haven't talked about that you're dying to ask or be asked and answer before we kind of wind down this conversation? I could talk to you for hours and listen to you as well. But what is the thing that we haven't touched on that you think you might be worth just throwing out there, and we could always have you back and do another piece?
So we've got to talk about crypto, AI, the intersection, what's happening with OpenClaw, why it's so important. to go up that learning curve sooner than later. I like to say your proximity to the intelligence explosion is everything. Like that's what we saw with crypto back in 2012 is like the year you got in really mattered, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's going to go a lot faster this time. It's like the month that you onboarded with these tools is really going to matter. Like, oh, I got in January of,
right. We're gonna brag. We're gonna talk about that the way we're like, how long have you been in Bitcoin? Oh, I was in 2013, but I got serious in 2017. Like there'll be a thing like that. Like, when did you get in? I was in January 25th, right before OpenClaw. I was, I was in March of that, whatever, right? People reference this and go, I listened to David Johnston and I got in that night. Like people brag about it, right? 20 years
because
from
it
now,
won't be a 10-year run. Like this thing is happening this year, right?
Yeah, no, I tell people that again, and I'm a talker and I'm an amplifier, and so people always think it's hyperbole. I go, as much as I can tell you, I've said something that was big before. This is not about size or scope. This is just literally understanding a penny doubled every day for 30 days. Doesn't get interesting till day 28, and then it becomes $5.3 million on day 30. And a year from then, if it kept doing that, it's worth more than money than it's been ever created in the planet. And if you think about, we just hit the 28th day in intelligence, right? Then don't think about where it's at the end of the month. Think about where it goes in the next 11, because we literally hit that moment, January 27th. So we are a month in. We already are at the $5.3 million penny today as you listen to this. Decide when and where to fit in and get in, but a year from now, you will not recognize a lot about things. And so I know the last thing I wanted to end on, because it's perfect. I got to get mine. You got to go get yours. You've got young kids, and you were homeschooled. I'm sure you do some version of that. We do, we moved where we moved currently because of wanting to put our oldest son, who was 2 last time, I think. Well, no, he was 6 when you last, but he's in 8th grade now. And so when you think about the future of education, meaning college education, things like that, what's your advice? What are you thinking about for yourself as it relates to your children, and how you not only talk to them without overwhelming them, but like how you prepare them for the world that we are going to be living in the next 12 to 36 months and then beyond? Like, what are you thinking about? What's on your mind from your perspective that other parents might benefit from?
I've been thinking a lot about that. I think bringing the people that you love and care about, your kids, your parents, into this is important. I remember, telling a lot of people about Bitcoin in 2012, and it took a while for some of them to grok it, but for those that did, it was really life-changing, right? And I think we're at a similar moment here now. And so, yeah, I would try to go up the learning curve for yourself, and then I would try to extend that. You can't do it for everybody, but you can do it for those that are close to you. And I think that'll have an outsized impact. As far as kids, I think there's never been a better time to have agency and be creative and want to accomplish things. Like the era of the solopreneur has arrived, right? The creator of OpenClaw basically did it by himself, and in 90 days he went from nothing to call it a $10 billion exit, right? That is incredible, right? And it won't be the last. It'll be the first of, I want to build something. All those barriers have fallen away. If you have access to these tools, you can build whatever you can imagine. I describe it to people as, I am only bottlenecked now by my ability to articulate what I want to accomplish and how fast I can do that. And that's an amazing.
And I think that's the key. The thing that attracted us to the environment we put our oldest in and that we're trying to create is teaching them to think for themselves and having the agency around, even against mom and dad, even being able to articulate my thoughts as a soul, as a unique one of one human, are not only matter, but I can advocate for them, but I can respect others. I can be in conversation. I can debate. I can have a different opinion, but I don't have to diminish mine. And I also now am in a position where fire's been invented, and electricity, like we've now hit this moment of intelligence, hitting that, right? And it never goes back. And so what do I want to do? How do I want to use that to apply my unique sense of self to the world and hopefully make a better impact? I think it's the best time ever to be a parent. as scary as it may be, I also think it's the best time to start having kids if you don't. Because that's what humanity has always done. It's always figured out a way to continue to propagate itself. And
100%.
So, well, it was amazing talking with you, my friend, and I look forward to all the things we'll be doing together, I'm sure, over the next 12 months as we run in parallel and whatever. But I'll give you the final word and tell people how to best get in touch with you, or where to find some of the things that you have been working on that are available for them to shorten their learning curve or their experience.
Sure. So happy to speak to that. I post a lot on X, so feel free to follow me. D Johnston EC. E as in Echo, C as in Charlie. That's my handle there. I publish a lot of articles. I talk at a lot of conferences. I'm pretty approachable. I'm a bit of an open book. I'm building open source. So, I don't have any NDAs or confidential information. Everything is built in public. So I'm pretty free to talk about anything I'm building and what we're creating. But yeah, happy to engage with folks. I talk with a lot of investors, a lot of family offices, have had that public company experience as well as, VC and the other side of it. So I spend a lot of time with engineers, but my goal is to translate that to capital folks to show them what's coming and what's possible with the technology. So,
and if they want to work with Morpheus, or they want to work with Everclaw, some of the tool sets you mentioned, where do they go find those on GitHub? And I know you said everclaw.xyz, so we'll put that in the show notes. Morpheus is .ai.
It's more.org, more.org, and specifically for the inference, you can go to app.more.org.
Okay.
There. And so yeah, both of those are, and you have the one for Everclaw already. So yeah, they're my personal GitHub. I think it's David Johnston CEO or something like that. So, but you just Google it, you'll find me, and check it out. Give me feedback. There's a world of opportunity here. Yeah.
Awesome. David Johnston, thank you for being here, man. So great to reconnect with you, and we'll see you next time on the Atomic Level.
All right, bro.